The Memphis Grizzlies season, unfortunately, is over. But if you had told any Memphis fan before the season that this was the kind of year that they were going to have, they would have taken it 100 out of 100 times. The youngest 55-win team in league history. You make the second round of the playoffs. You're a couple of games away from making the Western Conference Finals. Ja turns into a legitimate MVP candidate. All of those things were incredible positives for this team. A team that over the last couple of years has done so many small things right. They drafted Desmond Bane. They drafted Brandon Clark. They brought in Dillon Brooks. They capitalized on their lottery luck by drafting Jaren Jackson Jr., by drafting Ja Morant, getting good value out of Mike Conley and Marc Gasol as they transitioned into a new era. This is a front office that we have spotlighted over the last couple of seasons as one that has done an incredible job, and the fruits of that labor were seen this season. However, this is a really critical offseason for Memphis. This is the final year. Next year will be the final year of Ja Morant's rookie contract and the flexibility that that affords you. And despite their year this year, you need to figure out a way to elevate the ceiling of your team a little bit to become a true championship contender, and that's what we're going to be talking about in the video today. Now, it's actually really interesting that Memphis is a team that we're covering today, because when you look at some of the other off-season preview videos that I've done recently, you're looking at a team like Utah and a team like Philadelphia, teams that are playoff teams this year, but clearly have a lot of questions this offseason with the entirety of their roster pretty much. Memphis is in a completely different situation. You feel really good about 10 to 12 players on this Memphis roster, and what you need to do as the front office is figure out how to elevate things. They went into last offseason and clearly felt like they needed to raise their ceiling. They understood that they were going to be a good team, they were going to be a deep team, but they made some very interesting moves trying to move up in the draft to get Zaire Williams. I think ultimately that has been a success so far. They bring in Steven Adams in exchange for Jonas Valanciunas and some other pieces as a part of that deal as well, and they really tried to shift around and make sure that they're focusing on the future. They don't want to be stuck in the middle. They don't want to be Utah, for example. They want their ceiling to go higher than that, and I think they're getting pretty close. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is a really pivotal offseason for them because Jaren Jackson Jr. is already signed to a long-term contract, and Ja will be on a max starting 2 seasons from now. Next season is the last year that Ja is on his rookie contract. That allows you to do a lot of different things from a contract and a salary cap standpoint that are a little bit more difficult afterwards. And so to me, in this offseason, despite the incredible success that Memphis had this year, and obviously you don't want to do too much, you don't want to mess with the team too much, everything is on the table with the exception, in my opinion, of trading Ja Morant. I think every other player on the roster is gettable, and is tradable if you can find the correct deal. And primarily for me, something that we saw in the postseason, whether it be with or without Ja, I think they need more offensive perimeter creation. I think that's priority number one. And they're in a really good spot to add that kind of player because they have the assets to do so. They have plenty of depth, and their structure and the other players around Ja give them a really good chance to still maintain their top 5 rating in the league on the defensive end of the floor that they had this season, even if they bring in a star player that isn't that much of a two-way guy. Having someone alongside Ja that can create, having someone that can space off the ball for Ja, so that when things start to break down and you're really looking for offense, you're not looking at Dillon Brooks shooting the ball 30 times a game. And that's no disrespect to the rest of the roster Memphis has built. I like a lot of their players. Brooks, even as frustrating as he is on the offensive end of the floor at times, he's got kind of that 2017 to 2020 Marcus Smart in him, where he's got a little bit too much I got this in his offensive game. Defensively, he's incredible and he's very, very valuable. Desmond Bane is a player that I really like a lot. He's strong, he can guard, he can create, he's a really good shooter. Brandon Clark is someone that I like. Zaire Williams, I think, is going to continue to grow and develop, but I don't think the second star, the complementary offensive piece, is on this roster for Memphis. As much as I like Jaren Jackson Jr., I think he's very clearly a third option kind of guy moving forward with incredible defensive upside, and finding that running mate for Ja is priority one. And fortunately for them, there's a lot of guys available that could fill that void and fill that role. We've talked about them in a couple of different videos. Donovan Mitchell, Zach LaVine, James Harden, Bradley Beal. These are players that theoretically would fit really well in Memphis. The problem is, even with the success they had this year, and as much fun as Ja is, and it seems like Ja would be a really fun guy to play with, Memphis is not going to be a market. They're not going to be a team that is going to attract those level of players. Those guys want to play either where they already are or in a market like New York or Chicago or Miami or LA. They don't want to go to Memphis. And so that's the unfortunate place that Memphis finds themselves in. Is it's very clear what they need. It's very clear the void they need to fill. However, it's going to be difficult to do so with those tier 1 kind of guys. However, I don't think that means you completely close off the idea idea of going out and getting someone. For example, I think there's a couple of different options that make sense in the like Gordon Hayward area of things. And you don't want to be giving up a ton for Hayward given his injury history and his contract and things like that. But when he's healthy as a perimeter creator, I think he's a really interesting fit there in Memphis. You can trade a couple of pieces. Maybe there's a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 trade. You bring in Hayward and he's someone that can play on or off the ball. He can play with the bench unit when Ja goes to the bench. He can space for Ja when he's out there. I think that's a ceiling-raising kind of move. Now, the counter to that, of course, is the age of Hayward, his injury issues, and the fact that this is such a young roster that you can just kind of stand pat and wait for these guys to continue to grow and develop into one of the better teams in the league over the next couple of seasons. But that's the issue with where Memphis is for me right now, is I have a question mark for them, and it's a huge one. I just don't know if their ceiling from an offensive standpoint is good enough to be a championship-level team, even if Bane and Jaren Jackson and Brooks and Ja continue to grow and develop. What we've seen over the years in the NBA is these kinds of teams that are built around one guy, even if they're an MVP level guy, are not going to be good enough when you get to the postseason, when things slow down, especially if you struggle to shoot from the perimeter the way that Ja does, and you need a second guy. I don't imagine this core in Memphis, as interesting as they are, as young as they are, as much as they're likely to continue to develop, I don't see them as a championship group if they don't make some kind of significant offensive upgrade alongside Ja. Now, I could totally be wrong. Like Desmond Bane could become the next Klay Thompson and Jaren Jackson could become the next Chris Bosh offensively, and then they're fine. That's absolutely a possibility. But when you're dealing with a team like Memphis that has such an opportunity to be great for such a long period of time, I'd rather try and bring in someone that I at least feel a little bit better about as an offensive option alongside Ja. Now, I know a lot of this video has probably been a little bit more negative than you would have expected about Memphis, given the season that they had, and I don't want it to seem overly negative. I'm just trying to be realistic about the goal here. And the goal for Memphis is clearly we want to win a title. We want to be the best team in the league. We want to be what Milwaukee was as a small market team. But the problem is, even as great as Ja is, they don't have a Giannis level player on the roster, and they don't have a complimentary guy like Middleton or a complimentary guy like Jrue Holiday. And maybe they can get there, but that is going to be kind of the ceiling they're going to have to break through. Now, I also want to reiterate that I'm not advocating for any kind of crazy move here. Like, if a good move doesn't present itself, Memphis should not, even given the contract stuff with Ja and the timeline, like, they should not be in a hurry to try and make some crazy big win now move. But if something presents itself, I think that is going to be the thing that's going to allow them to kind of jump up a level. And again, I would go back to that example with Utah, a team that has been good and made a lot of really good moves, and they brought in Donovan Mitchell and developed guys like Rudy Gobert. They brought in Bogdanovich, and they created a team that was very, very good. And even though they were the 1 seed, just like Memphis had one of the better records in the league this year, they never were truly a championship level team. And now they've been stuck in the middle for so long that things are starting to go downhill. Now their foundation was not laid nearly as well as what Memphis has right now because of the youth of this Memphis roster and the amount of assets they have and all that different stuff. But it's kind of an example to point to as like, this is what I would be afraid of turning into a team that is built around one offensive guy, a handful of pretty interesting, role players and guys that can play off them, but they never truly have, a championship level group. That would be something I would be terrified of turning into if I was the Memphis front office. But the key is to not let that fear, make you make some kind of rash decision here. Now, maybe I'll be completely surprised this offseason and they'll actually have a real shot at Levine or Mitchell or Beal or one of these guys. I would be pretty surprised if that happened. But again, I think that would be the perfect fit for them. Ultimately, though, you really can't go wrong if you're Memphis. It's very clear they're going to be a high-level team for the next couple of seasons at least. If they're healthy, they have a top 4, top 5 roster, in the West, maybe top 6 if you're counting teams like Denver and LA coming back really strong next year. But 55 wins with this young of a team, with a team that is still really growing and developing, these guys aren't truly in their primes yet, is a great accomplishment. And absolutely, it's something to be celebrated. I just would always make sure that we're progressing. We're moving forward. We're looking at raising the ceiling of our team. And I feel confident that that's where Memphis is going to land. Given how they handled last offseason, they very easily could have just looked at a team that made a pretty surprising push towards the playoffs and just say, hey, we're just going to keep it exactly the way it is and hope that it continues to grow and develop. And so if I was a Memphis fan, I would feel really confident not only about the roster, about the youth, about the depth, but also the front office, a group that has shown creativity, ingenuity, and aggressiveness at times when it's needed. I think all 3 of those things are going to be required this offseason to continue to try and push towards a championship level team. And on top of all that, there's one big piece that we really still need to cover here, and that is the fact that this team is really good without Ja. And it's weird how good a team is, not only without their best player, but also how often Ja seems to be missing games, missing significant time. I don't really know what to do with that still. Obviously, Memphis is a better basketball team when Ja Morant is playing, and maybe some of this is scheduling stuff, and they're playing, weaker teams, and they obviously are almost as well equipped as you can possibly be to deal with not having their star out there because of the sheer amount of depth. I think that's one of the reasons the record was so good this year, is because they were healthy, and then when they weren't, they had so many guys they could throw out there and could play 20-25 minutes for them, even guys that really weren't getting regular rotation minutes. So when it came to protocol stuff, when it came to injuries, they were really able to withstand that stuff better than anyone else. That's one of the reasons why they had one of the best records in the league. And I don't really know what to do with that moving forward. Obviously, Ja's incredible. They're incredible with him. And I'm hoping this doesn't turn into some kind of crazy narrative. So yeah, that's kind of what to look forward to for the Memphis offseason. Let me know down in the comment section below what other team you want me to talk about in terms of what is next for their group.